All right. Continuing on, Acts chapter 14. The story continues. At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the Jewish synagogue. That's like the church. There they spoke so effectively that a great number of Jews and Gentiles believed. But the Jews who refused to believe stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brothers. The brothers being like spiritual brothers, Paul and Barnabas. So Paul and Barnabas spent considerable time there, speaking boldly for the Lord, who confirmed the message of his grace by enabling them to do miraculous signs and wonders. The people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, others sided with the apostles, being Barnabas and Paul. Apostles is kind of a special title of disciple or leader. There was a plot afoot among the Gentiles and Jews, together with their leaders, to mistreat them and stone them. But they found out about it and fled to the Lycaonian cities of Lystra and Derbe and to the surrounding country, where they continued to preach the good news. Now in Lystra there sat a man crippled in his feet, who was lame from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him and saw that he had faith to be healed, and he called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that the man jumped up and began to walk. Interesting to note that it was a mixture of the authority and the power given to Paul, but also the faith of that man that he could be healed. It was the mixture of the two. When the crowd saw that what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. I think there was an old Greek mythology that prophesied that Zeus and Hermes would come down and would perform miracles and different things like that. And so when they saw that this man walked because of Paul, they thought this Greek mythology prophecy was coming true. But it actually wasn't. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We too are only men, humans like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and sea and everything in them. In the past he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." Even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day he and Barnabas left for Derbe. They preached the good news in that city and won a large number of disciples. Then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, going back the way they had come, strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. "We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God," they said. And the kingdom of God is basically a new way of living according to the standards of Jesus, living in such a way that we help change people around us, we help change society, but we do that by living in a completely different way than the people around us, living by the words of Jesus, living out the love of God, practicing grace and forgiveness to other people. I'm in verse 23 here. Paul and Barnabas appointed elders for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting committed them to the Lord, in whom they had put their trust. After going through a place called Pisidia, they came into another area called Pamphylia. And when they had preached the word in Perga, a city, they went down to Attalia. These names of places don't necessarily need to mean anything. It's just a history story. From Attalia they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together and reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. And they stayed there a long time with the disciples. And that is the end of chapter 14. Amazing to hear the stories of where these guys went, what they did on God's behalf, what God did through them, and how some people embraced it and how many people misunderstood it. And that is pretty much the history of what it means to be a Christian. That some will understand us, but many will not understand us, and they will want to give us a hard time. The choice for us is to continue to believe and to treat people with dignity and respect and the love that only comes through Jesus. See you later.